Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. Welcome to Africa 54. Here is what's coming up. Explosions rock Bakara market in Somalia, killing at least 10 people. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is in Israel and says Hamas leaders are responding to a hostage proposal that would pause hostilities. And in our technology report, CEOs of big tech and social media companies testify before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee about child safety. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. Residents are still recovering one day after several explosions detonated in the Bakara market in Somalia's capital, killing at least 10. David Doyle has more.
Deadly blasts erupted at an open-air market in Somalia's capital on Tuesday. The Bakara market is Mogadishu's biggest, usually teeming with traders and residents buying food, clothes, medicines and electronics. But now many shops are in ruins and lives have been lost. One trader, Hassan Ali, said he had counted 10 dead bodies and at least 15 others injured. His shop, he said, was completely destroyed after 4 explosions in the center of the market. 3 nurses at Erdogan Hospital in Mogadishu reported that over 20 injured people had been brought to the facility. It was not immediately clear who was responsible, though al-Shabaab militants frequently carry out bombings in the country. The jihadist group has been battling Somalia's federal government and an African Union-mandated peacekeeping force for years, seeking to establish a new government based on its own interpretation of Sharia law. The government was not immediately available for comment.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. The mobile internet service has been restored in Senegal after 2 days of curfew-style restrictions meant to contain unrest linked to the sudden postponement of February presidential election, according to Internet Monitor NetBlocks. Members of the National Assembly voted Monday evening to postpone the election until December.
Stopping this electoral process, working to ensure that they are free, transparent, democratic and inclusive elections means working to save Senegal for future generations. Because we shouldn't go to an election where we come out with endless protests to say that we have an illegitimate president. That's what happened in Senegal. That's what happened at the National Assembly. And that's why we, BBY MPs, are so proud of ourselves. It became clear to us that the conditions for a free, transparent and inclusive elections were not in place. That's why we decided once again support this initiative, which led to the vote on the law postponing the presidential elections to December 15, 2024.
The vote paves the way for President Macky Sall, whose second term was due to expire in early April, to remain in office until his successor is installed, probably in 2025. Opposition members say the country has been taken hostage. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says Hamas leaders are responding to a hostage proposal that would pause hostilities. He says the United States is studying that response intently and will discuss it during his visit to Israel Wednesday. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports from the State Department.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken had a packed day of diplomacy in the Middle East and shared this new development at a press conference in Qatar.
So together with Qatar and Egypt, we put forward, as you know, a serious proposal that was aimed at not simply repeating the previous agreement, but expanding it. As the Prime Minister just said, Hamas responded tonight. We're reviewing that response now, and I'll be discussing it with the government of Israel tomorrow.
Blinken said a lot of work remained to be done on a deal, but he continued to believe that an agreement was possible and essential. Qatar's Prime Minister, Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, said the reply from Hamas in general was positive. At the White House, President Joe Biden was more cautious, saying there is some movement on the hostage situation.
There's been a response from the opposition, but yes, I'm sorry, from Hamas, but it seems to be a little over the top. We're not sure where it is. There's a continuing negotiation right now.
No details of the deal have been revealed. Qatar has been working with the United States and Egypt to broker an agreement that would involve an extended pause in fighting and the release of the more than 100 hostages still held by Hamas. The U.S.-designated terrorist group staged an October 7th attack that killed 1,200 Israelis and triggered the war. Israeli attacks on Gaza have left more than 27,478 Palestinians dead, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. Blinken arrived in Doha for talks after meeting with Egyptian leaders in Cairo. He started his fifth Middle East trip since the war began with a visit to Saudi Arabia. Blinken will hold talks in Israel Wednesday to discuss the hostage deal and Hamas response. One expert told VOA there are lots of obstacles.
I think one of the key sticking points, Hamas really wants something that's more of a longer term, more permanent ceasefire, if you will. Israel wants all of its hostages back, but Hamas has for years, in previous instances, placed a higher price on Israel Defense Forces soldiers that they have in their custody.
On Monday, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant warned that Israel's ground forces could advance on the southern city of Rafah, where Palestinians were told they needed to flee to from the north. Gallant said every Hamas terrorist hiding in Rafah should know that his end would be the same as others, saying, "Surrender or die. There is no third option."
For more on Blinken's latest visit to the Middle East, I'm joined live via Skype from here in Washington by Cindy Sain. She is VOA's senior diplomatic correspondent. Cindy, good to have you on the show today. What more can you tell us about the hostage proposal?
Yes, thank you so much, Esther. Well, we are getting some reports of what was in this Hamas counterproposal, if you will. And it looks like Hamas is envisaging a 4.5 month time frame, which would have 3 different phases. And in the first phase, some hostages would be released, women and young boys. There would be a massive humanitarian effort to help civilians in Gaza. And then there would be other phases where more hostages would be reduced, and they apparently are asking for 1,500 Palestinians, prisoners, to be released. And what Hamas is calling for in the third phase is an end to the war. And then all the hostages would be released and the remains of those who have been killed.
Cindy, varied proposals here between the Hamas and Israel. What's Secretary Blinken's reaction?
Right. Well, we have Secretary Blinken in Israel. He has met with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu for a little over an hour. He's met with members of the Israeli War Cabinet. He went over to the West Bank, as he has each trip, and met with the Palestinian Authority President Abbas, and is heading back to Israel, where we're going to get 2 separate press conferences, one with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu on his own, and a separate one with Secretary Blinken. So Israeli sources are reporting that Israel is basically deciding whether to just reject this Hamas counterproposal outright or to enter into negotiations. And I'm pretty sure that Secretary Blinken is pushing for Israel to enter into negotiations, saying this deal needs work, but it's essential to get a deal.
So do we know really if, the kind of tag here about the agreement, whether the United States or other parties involved in these mediation talks can bring these 2 groups to agree?
That's a very good question. And we know that there are fundamental differences, and that Israel has said officially they do not want Hamas controlling Gaza after this. And of course, Hamas is not likely to agree to that. So it's very difficult. Apparently, Hamas is asking for the day after this for the territory to be administered by the United Nations and Egypt and Qatar and several other countries, but not the United States. So I think that the positions right now are still far apart, but at least they are talking about some kind of a deal now.
Cindy, many thanks to you for your excellent reporting. VOA's Cindy Sain. Time to check out our sports. 4 teams are left in the Africa Cup of Nations. South Africa's Bafana Bafana squares off with Nigeria's Super Eagles in the first semi-finals. Host Ivory Coast is seeking to extend their redemption story in Wednesday's semi-finals against the Democratic Republic of Congo. Tuso Kumalo in Johannesburg spoke to supporters of South Africa's Bafana Bafana and Nigeria's Super Eagles.
The semi-final match between South Africa's Bafana Bafana and Nigeria's Super Eagles could be a match that could restore lost love for Bafana Bafana. The last time the team was at this stage was in 2000, and the last time they won this cup was in 1996. Their fans here are saying they want nothing less than a win tonight.
Yeah, I'm confident. Hey, I trust the boys, especially after the last game. Hopefully they have enough confidence to come through for us today. We have to go to the finals. It's a must. It's a must for South Africa, man. Come on, we need to get there, honestly.
It's a very difficult decision to say, but then yeah, I believe the boys will win. Yeah, we are behind our boys. Prediction 3-1.
At the same time, the Super Eagles will not be a walk in the park for Bafana Bafana. They've already won this cup 3 times, and they are in the list of the win favorites of the tournament. And their fans here in Pretoria, South Africa say they expect also nothing less than a win tonight and a win in the final Sunday.
South Africans are our younger brothers. You know, our players are more determined and our players are more professional. And of course, you know, Nigeria is a football-loving nation. They know what the consequences will be back home if they don't win. They need to deliver.
The team is actually filled with professionals, and I'm really confident that they will deliver the Nations Cup.
When all is said and done, after the 90 minutes, only one team will proceed to the final. Tuso Kumalo for VOA News, Pretoria.
Thanks, Tuso. Tuso Kumalo speaking to supporters of South Africa's Bafana Bafana and Nigeria's Super Eagles ahead of the team's game in Abidjan. Still to come, violence against women and children continues to be a serious issue in South Africa. We'll have a report. Stay with us.
This week on Straight Talk Africa. Protests in Senegal. Police have fired tear gas at opposition supporters in the capital of Dakar. President Macky Sall has announced the indefinite postponement of the presidential elections, which was set for February 25th. Is Senegal's democracy now hanging by a thread? And in Namibia, Nangolo Mbumba, who took over as interim president after Hage Geingoob's sudden death, says he's not going to run in this year's elections. What's the future of Namibia's Liberation ruling party? Join me, Hayley Adams, and my guests for in-depth analysis on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Life's challenges can be viewed as opportunities to grow, learn, and be the best version of yourself. By looking inward, personal development increases your self-awareness, your self-esteem, and your chances to fulfill your aspirations. On this week's edition of Our Voices, we'll be joined by a life coach to explore the journey of personal development and how it can help you cultivate a mindset of success. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In other news, Nigeria's cabinet ministers have held emergency meetings on the economy and food prices as the government comes under increasing pressure over the fallout from President Bola Tinubu's reforms. Officials have repeatedly urged Nigerians to be patient, but inflation was nearly 29% in December, according to the National Bureau of Statistics. The Zimbabwean cabinet has agreed to abolish the death penalty following months of debate in parliament, choosing instead to impose lengthy prison sentences for the worst offenses. Currently, men found guilty of aggravated murder can still be sentenced to death. And the United Nations is appealing for $4 billion to provide desperately needed aid to civilians in conflict-stricken Sudan and for those who have fled as refugees. Fighting that erupted last April between Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces has killed thousands. Violence against women and children continues to be one of the most serious and deadliest crises facing South Africa. The country's current crime statistics paint a somber picture of women under siege. It's a scourge that Police Minister Becky Cele describes as shameful and one that must be confronted head-on by government, law enforcement, and society. However, for many women in South Africa, help is often too little and too late. Tuso Khumalo reports from Johannesburg.
38-year-old Vandar Vesthuizen has been married for 10 years. The mother of 5 lives in an informal settlement in the Kalahari Desert of South Africa's Northern Cape province. After 8 years in an abusive marriage, Vandar Vesthuizen has filed for divorce.
When he comes home, when he was drunk, he was like, he hit me. I was lying with a purple eye, and so when my oldest daughter came and sees that, she was like, "Mommy, why are you looking like this?" I was only crying because I don't have answers for her.
Vandar Vesthuizen says the physical and emotional abuse, along with her husband's refusal to support their children financially, had pushed her to the limit.
I was like, no, I must stop. I must divorce you before I will kill you. Because I'm a person, I'm taking a knife also. And to want to help myself and stand up for myself. And that's not a solution.
According to the South African Police Ministry's latest crime statistics, over 10,000 women were raped in just 3 months between July and September last year. In nearly 50% of rape incidents, the perpetrators were known to their victims. They are often family members, friends, or neighbors. Statistics show 14,000 women in South Africa in that same period were victims of assault with serious bodily harm, leading to the death of about 900 women. Children are also at risk. Close to 300 deaths were recorded during this time, with about 2,000 severely assaulted. South Africa's Commission for Gender Equality is tasked with ensuring that policies to protect women are implemented and enforced.
We've, over the years, brought in, I'll make an example, the Commissioner of the South African Police Services, the Minister of Police, the Health Department, the justice system, let me say entirely, and a number of civic organizations, government, civil society, to come and to account on the work that they are doing, because we are actually realizing, indeed there is work that is being done, but there are gaps.
The Akisanang Domestic Abuse Prevention and Training, ADAPT, organization says it's also doing its part through programs that help rehabilitate male perpetrators of violence against women.
We gather men around, we work with men, we develop programs and activities that will be able to target men. Would go to prison, would go to tavern, would mobilize men together to come and sit so that we are able to effectively deliberate around these particular issues.
Child rights activists say they are now working with early childhood development or ECD centers and schools to help identify potential child abuse cases.
We are working with ECDs, and the ECDs that we work with, we educate them about the signs that they can look at within their work spaces and see children's behaviors. And we have kids clinic that we encourage them to refer the kids if they see something that they don't understand.
Van der Westhuizen hopes more women will speak out and get out of abusive relationships before it's too late.
You must stand up and get everything done. It's for our kids. It's not for ourselves, but it's for our kids. Because if you are sitting in that situation, your kids will also suffer from that.
In 2020, the government launched a national strategic plan for gender-based violence and femicide. Most police stations now have a gender-based violence desk, and more police officers are being trained to help women and children at risk. Tuso Kumalo for VOA News, Johannesburg.
CEOs of big tech and social media companies testified recently before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee about child safety on their platforms and the need for regulation. This conversation is also taking place on the African continent. Technology correspondent Paul Diho has more. Hello, Paul.
Esther, academic experts, research organizations, and political and tech sectors are discussing the need for regulations to keep up with emerging technologies across Africa. For more insight, I spoke to Glenn Mpani, a political campaigns expert and managing partner at Shikamo Political Advisory and Campaign Services based in Cape Town, South Africa. Welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you so much, Paul.
There's a lot of talk about big tech and regulation. Why is it important for these big tech companies to be regulated?
Political campaigns have evolved. Technology is now at the center of all political campaigns. So it's very difficult for any society to run away from the impact of technology. I think with the penetration of mobile connectivity across Africa, use of mobile phones, citizens now can be reached from their mobile phones. And therefore, if you want to be able to ensure the integrity of elections, you can't run away from talking to the big tech companies who are churning out most of these solutions and who are working across the continent.
Why is it that, let's say, there is a mixed bag of sorts? When there are people who are pro-regulation and there are those who say maybe they shouldn't even regulate AI at all, or any tech companies. Why is that?
It's very important for us to understand that, for example, if you're talking about AI is still at its nascent stage. I think there are many solutions that are being developed that have to do with messaging, targeting, and mobilization. But while these tools are being developed, there is also a risk that comes with these key tools that are there that warrants regulation. Because if you don't regulate, let's talk about messaging. If you've got a tool that is in the wrong hands, it gives an opportunity to disinformation. It also affects the credibility of the process and the credibility of the electoral process. So you can't have such a process unregulated. And corporates, they are in it for profit. So while they're in it for profit, if you don't regulate them, it becomes a free-for-all for people who are using it for good and those who are using it for bad. And so you can't do that. So we need to balance the act. So the idea of us talking about regulation is for us to find a middle spot that allows business to thrive, but also ensuring that the tools are used effectively.
Glenn, you bring up a very good point. You talked about the issue of regulation. Just last week here in the United States, you had lawmakers trying to bring these tech companies to answer a few questions when it comes to regulation. How can now regulators, even in Africa or whether it's here in the United States, come to terms with it? How can they hold these big tech companies to account?
With regulation, I have a view that there is always scope to learn from each other, but context matters. We cannot copy and paste how regulation is taking place in the West, but we can obviously learn from it. The context of Africa differs in a number of areas. The social, political, and economic context should drive the process. Secondly, the understanding of the context. If you come up with a one-size-fits-all rule in Africa, where you've got disparities in technology, disparities in affordability of either data and technology, you also don't want the regulations to provide a skewed view between ruling and opposition party, because regulation can play a very negative role. So we want regulation to be done mindful of context and reality, but there is really scope for us to be able to learn from each other.
What role should the media play when it comes to maybe advancing a technology in Africa or being on the cutting edge of technology, as some of these tools, especially AI tools, continue to to evolve?
The role of media is to inform. You cannot inform if you are not skilled. You cannot inform if you are not knowledgeable. So one of the challenges that our media is facing is it transitioning from the mainstream media that was used to the digital platforms. So the challenge that is there is media has to be adept. It has to move very fast with the scope and with the world in terms of where things are happening. When an election is about to take place, even if you are not working in that country, I think one of our responsibilities as an advisory firm is to bring in journalists and explain numbers to them, the implications, so that the stories are rich. Voters only rely on what the media gives. So it's very, very important. It's not difficult to explain numbers even to the lowest of our people who are not literate. They will understand it. But the unfortunate thing is our media is not really skilled enough to be able to advance that agenda.
On that note, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, Glenn.
Thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Glenn Mpandi is a political campaigns expert and managing partner at Shikamo, a political and advisory campaign services. That's our tech report. Back to you, Esther.
Thanks, Paul. Be sure to join Paul Ndiho each Wednesday for his tech report right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching. What's up, Paul?